On the endless American roads, where asphalt intertwines with vast fields and dense forests, a young couple, Sara and Ethan, traveled with their dog, Molly. It was their first trip together after their wedding, a journey to discover the forgotten corners of the country. The atmosphere was idyllic, the sun drifting lazily across the sky, and melodic tunes seeped from the radio. But with each mile, they became more aware that the sky, which initially seemed clear blue, held dark secrets within. The road led them through an abandoned village where time seemed to stand still. Suddenly, their car, an old sedan from the 80s, came to a halt. Ethan turned the key in the ignition, but the engine only groaned reluctantly. Molly, their shepherd, began to growl, her fur bristling, eyes gleaming in the dusk. Ominous forest shadows tightened their grip on the road, the atmosphere thickening like air before a storm. Sara watched with worry as her husband tried to start the car, while Molly, still growling, started jumping toward the window as if she saw something invisible. Frustrated, Ethan pulled out his phone, but the signal had vanished like a fading morning dream. Around them, an eerie silence prevailed. Even the rustling leaves were still. A faint streetlight flickered, and strange noises from the forest made the hairs on their arms stand up. Their cell phones were dead, deepening the isolation. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to control the growing anxiety creeping into his mind. Then, something caught his attention. He looked at the asphalt in front of the car. From the dark depths of the night, letters slowly started to form, as if an invisible hand was sketching them. "We've been waiting for you." A chilling phrase sent a shiver down his spine. Stunned, Ethan couldn't believe his eyes. The letters slowly materialized, each one glowing in the night, though he saw no hand writing them. Feeling the tension in the air, Sara clung closer to his arm, her eyes wide with fear as she watched the letters take shape, filling the space in the moonlight. "Ethan, this isn't normal," she whispered, her voice trembling. The darkness seemed to close in around them, with the damp scent of earth lingering. Molly suddenly froze, her ears perked, tail tucked between her legs. She began to growl as though sensing something invisible to human eyes. The growling emanated from her chest, like echoes of forest sounds taking on new meaning in this terrifying moment. Ethan watched the letters with mounting concern. They shifted, pulsing as if alive. As some letters faded, others appeared rapidly, sending chills down his spine. Soon, new words appeared above their heads on the asphalt, written in a dark, disturbing style. "Now you can't leave." Ethan's heart pounded faster. The forest grew darker, as if the trees and leaves themselves had become part of this frightening message. This wasn't just an event, it was a threat. It was as if the entire landscape bore witness to something about to unfold. A sudden cold wind pierced the air, carrying a whisper, a sound that seemed to echo their fears, hinting at visions of what might happen in this forsaken village. In the distance, the forest seemed to stir, as if preparing to reveal its dark secrets. Ethan looked at Sara, and their terrified glances said more than words ever could. Sara opened the door, intending to flee, but then the car suddenly started moving. Surprised, they both sat down, their bodies paralyzed by fear. The car began reversing toward the forest as though guided by an unseen force. Molly barked into the darkness, her sounds echoing off the trees. As the car moved backward, Ethan realized the trees grew more terrifying with each moment, their shapes taking forms that could haunt the darkest nightmares. Suddenly, a red light flickered inside the car, and strange symbols appeared on the dashboard that made no sense. Sara grabbed Ethan's hand, their fingers intertwined with inhuman tension. Dark thoughts swirled in Ethan's mind about what awaited them, as if the forest was ready to embrace them with open arms. At one point, Molly froze, her ears detecting something they couldn't hear. Sara, in horror, noticed shadows moving outside, synchronized with their breaths. Ethan, determined, got out of the car despite the fear gripping his throat. Molly kept growling, staring into the darkness, while Sara clung to the car door, begging him to stay inside. But something urged him to check on the engine. The surrounding forest grew eerily silent, as if the whole world held its breath. He opened the hood, trying to steady his growing fear. He attempted to locate the issue, but could barely see anything in the darkness. Then, Sara heard a rustling sound from the forest, as if someone or something was circling nearby. She stopped, listening, her heart racing faster. "Ethan, come back," she whispered desperately, but he just waved her off, trying not to let his emotions take over. A gust of cold air brushed their faces, and from the forest's depths came a low, drawn-out sound. It was unnatural, as if the noise originated from a place they were never meant to hear. "There's nothing here, Sara," Ethan said loudly, trying to convince both her and himself. At that moment, Molly bolted toward the forest, barking wildly. Sara and Ethan chased after her, adrenaline pushing them forward. They ran through the darkness, tripping over uneven ground, branches scraping their faces, each step intensifying their fear. Finally, after a few hundred yards, they reached an abandoned old house at the forest's edge. It looked untouched for decades, overgrown with wild vegetation, windows boarded up. Molly stood in front of the door, growling, her fur bristling like never before. The door was ajar, and a faint light glowed inside as if someone had just turned it on. "Ethan, this isn't a good idea," Sara whispered, feeling her throat tighten with fear. But Ethan moved forward. He swallowed hard and gently pushed the door open. Inside, he saw a dusty old room with overturned furniture and decayed photos on the walls. But what grabbed his attention was the rotary phone on a table in the center, which suddenly rang, shattering the silence. Ethan picked up the receiver, hearing only breathing on the other end. Heavy, labored, as if someone stood nearby, though no one was there. Ethan dropped the receiver, and then the door behind them slammed shut. At that moment, they both knew this wasn't a coincidence. Whatever was in that place didn't want them to leave. They quickly opened the door and ran back toward the car, with Molly barking at their heels. When they reached the car, Ethan got behind the wheel and tried to start the engine. This time, to their surprise and relief, the car started. Sara, still breathless with fear, looked at him, trying to comprehend what had happened. "Ethan, we need to get out of here, now." They sped away, not looking back. As they passed through the deserted village, they noticed their phones had regained signal. Sara dialed emergency services, reporting everything they'd seen. When she mentioned the strange events and the old house, the voice on the other end sounded surprisingly indifferent. "A house? Ma'am, there's no house there. It was demolished years ago after a tragic fire." A cold shiver ran down Sara's spine as the line went dead again. They drove on in silence, unable to believe what had just happened. Whatever was there, they left it behind. But the question of what truly lurked in that abandoned house would haunt them forever.